Good evening, and welcome to Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Gene Preuss with the League of Women Voters of Houston. Tonight, we're going to talk about election issues and topics for the upcoming season, the electoral season. But first of all, it was hot on Saturday, and I was driving around in Independence Heights around True Light Baptist Church, and I saw members of Omega Psi Phi fraternity out registering people to vote in the 100-degree weather, and I wanted to give them a shout out and let them tell you a little bit about what they're doing. And so what are you guys doing out here today?
We are having a voter registration drive for the 9th District of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. We have 4 locations around the city to get our citizens registered to vote for the upcoming election, November 3rd.
All right, and so this is we're here on Saturday. How long are you doing this drive?
We're here at True Light Missionary Baptist Church from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Okay. And are you here every weekend?
No, we will not be here every weekend, but we will be back out on voter registration day in September.
Okay. Now, they were out there with someone from the Census Bureau who was also making sure that citizens were taking part of the census. Very important, because that's how federal money comes back home and serves the people. So thank you for your volunteering, and thank you to others who are doing the same thing as we get ready and prepare ourselves for the upcoming election. And now let's turn our attention to talking about the election. I have 2 special guests from San Marcos at Texas State University, Dr. Ashleen Menchaca Buñuelo, and from the University of Houston downtown, Dr. William Flores. Thank you for being on the show with me this evening.
Thank you for having me.
How's the weather in San Marcos?
It's nice, you know, it's the same old hot kind of thing, but my daughters like it.
I was down in the San Marcos area. I was actually through San Marcos yesterday, and it was 104 degrees.
Yes.
And it's not that bad here in Houston, but it's pretty close. So it's nice and warm. I lived out in Lubbock in West Texas. Everybody said, well, it's a dry heat. I said, yeah, so is a convection oven. So it was warm. So I want to thank you today. We do have a lot of issues. And before we get started, I want to mention some bad news that I got. As people know, I produce these programs and plan them out in advance. And one of the things that the League of Women Voters of the Houston area is concerned about is citizenship. And we usually go out when people are becoming citizens. We register them to vote. We're very interested in that. At our repast last year, immigration and citizenship was the focus. And in keeping in with that, I have some friends in New Braunfels who are friends with Paul Rusesabagina. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If you've seen the movie Hotel Rwanda, you know his story. He helped to rescue some people during the genocides that were going on there. He's been very active in humanitarian issues since then. He lives in San Antonio, and I've been talking to a friend of mine about possibly interviewing him to get the refugee side of the story. And in fact, I had contacted my friend and said, can we set up an appointment? And she says, well, call me Monday, because I'm out of town, and I'll get in touch with Paul and we'll see what we can arrange. She got back into town, and today she posted on Facebook that she got word from the Rusesabagina family that Paul had been in Dubai. The plane was diverted to Rwanda, and he was taken off and arrested by the government. So they are working to get in touch with people at the State Department, at Amnesty International, and other places to address the situation and to make sure he's okay. it's I was just telling Bill, and Bill and I have talked about this before, but in the United States, we are comfortable with dissent, right? We we criticize our political leadership, people we work with, our friends, and we do it freely, right? We have Facebook and social media, and we criticize one another, and that's just part of the American experience. And we don't normally think it's going to have bad repercussions.
Right.
But I think we live in a bubble,
Yeah.
in a sense, and not everybody else has that. So we're going to be keeping him and his family in our thoughts and prayers to make sure everyone's safe, and to ask for some intervention and some visits so that we can see that he is okay. I know that I don't want to get into the politics of it. It is a political issue. And so for me, I don't want to get involved in politics, but I do know that there are organizations out there like Amnesty International and others that are concerned about these. So hopefully they'll be able to look into this.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about politics here at home. The elections are coming up. We just wrapped up 2 conventions, the Republicans last week, the Democrats the week before that. We're talking about a lot of issues. We have candidates, the Biden-Harris ticket for the Democrats, and then the Trump-Pence ticket for the Republican Party. And certainly there's going to be other people on the ballot as well. And let's start off. Ashley, would you like to talk? Can you tell us a little bit about what you see is at stake? And later on, I'm going to, after I give Bill a chance, I'm going to go on and we're going to look at some national polls and see what other people think the big issues are, and we can talk about those. So Ashley, what do you see are the big issues this November?
I think a lot will depend on how things continue to unfold. But right now, one of the major points that I think the Democrats are doing a really good job of pushing hard on is the president's handling of COVID. Especially as we see the numbers continue to climb. This is one of the preeminent issues I think that a lot of citizens care about. I also know, and this is in tension with what I just said, that there are a lot of citizens who are paying close attention to the riots in different urban areas, and who are being sort of, I guess you might say, they see Trump maybe as a way of stopping these things, or of saving them from more like this. And so in this way, you have another major stability issue that is attracting some people to the Republicans. So it's an unusual election, in my opinion, because you have what people are viewing as kind of immediately life and death situations, whether or not we might agree with how they're interpreting them. COVID and the riots are very high level, very sort of complicated political and social situations. And so we're in a very important election, but I'm not sure how it's going to end up, how those cross pressures are going to work on actual voters. I've seen some data that suggests that the more that Trump presents himself as a law and order kind of person, the better that he fares. But I've also seen some data that has sort of, I guess, it doesn't associate the violence with the Democrats as much as it associates it with the actual Trump administration itself, and that they're saying this is happening under you, right? So I think a lot of it will also come down to where Americans place their judgment about who is responsible for different things that are happening right now. So who can save us is one important question, and who is responsible is another important question, just sort of listening to the electorate and what's really pressing for them.
Bill, what do you think?
Well, first of all, we've hit 6 billion as of today, in Americans with COVID. And that's an underestimation because, one, there are a lot of people that get tests that don't get results, or they get results after they're no longer any good. For example, right now in Texas, it's taking an average of 10 days at private laboratories and even some of the big hospitals to get your results. Two, that we're in a situation where we've got a little over 62 days, depending upon, when this airs. I think does it air Wednesday or Thursday or?
Thursday.
Thursday. So we'll have about 61 days by the time we hit Thursday for the elections. The clock is ticking. You're seeing a lot of things occurring that I think are creating a very toxic environment. For example, in Portland, you had a situation where there were 600 cars in the caravan, Trump supporters, and this is fine. However, the intent was essentially to disrupt protesters, and these were peaceful protesters that were then shot with spray paint or whatever else. Somebody shot one of the Trump supporters. We don't know, who did that or whatever. That's a dangerous situation. It's a powder keg. And rather than trying to calm it down, you have Trump saying that the people that are his people, even if they're militia or if they're, causing disruption, they're great patriots. That was his term, true patriots. Well, everybody else are anarchists, terrorists, anti-Americanists. This is a very dangerous kind of rhetoric, and it's heating up the divisions in our country, and really, it's done as a way of taking our eyes off of the real issue. The real issue is that on a national level, when we could have intervened, when we could have closed off the people coming in from Europe, as well as people coming in from China, we didn't. When we could have started national testing, we did not. When we could have done, put guidelines nationally, like other countries did, we did not. So we're in a situation now where COVID has dramatically increased. Remember, back in March, we had 6. Today we have 6 million people that are affected. This has caused a tremendous amount of anxiety. On the other hand, we have 40 million people unemployed. 12 million people this week lost their health insurance. So you're seeing a situation where there is a very rich and a very poor.
Yeah.
And it's accelerating, and it's a powder keg. And it's not just rich against poor or white against black or whatever else. Politicians have to provide leadership, and they have to provide calm. And rather than trying to accelerate rhetoric or intensify it, they need to use terms to promote unity and peace. That's not what we're getting from Washington. That's not what we're getting from President Trump, and that's unfortunate. And I've worked with Democrats, I've worked with Republican senators and congresspeople, with Democrat governors and congresspeople, and in both cases, the tradition of this country has been to promote unity, even when there is disagreement, to try and find solutions that bring us together. That has not been the approach used by President Trump, and I think what it's doing is it's really ripping apart the country. This election should be an opportunity to bring us together, but it's unfortunately bringing us apart, and that's very scary.
Doctor, sorry, go ahead, please.
I think that's part of what's really frightening me about it is you have this sort of life and death situation on the ballot, and you have people who are very anxious. You have an absence of leadership, and you have sort of citizens who don't know how to identify what is happening politically appropriately. So, for example, you'll find people who just make their decisions about what they believe politically sort of based on like a team sports kind of thing. I had a lot of conservative friends who, when they were watching what's happening in Wisconsin and they saw Kyle Rittenhouse, they immediately said, well, he's a hero, he's a hero. You say, well, why is he a hero? What did he do? And they don't really have more of an answer of why he's a hero than the fact that they see him as being on their team. And the more that this continues to happen, the more worried I am that we're not actually in a normal political process, and that the election won't get us out of the situation we're in because citizens are not behaving like I think that they have historically in a situation that is also a historical aberration.
And there's
So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a concern too about whether people's votes are going to be counted. You know, with the attacks on the and changes in the post office, what it's meant is, and this started a few months back. It's continued, and what we're seeing is slow mail delivery. And a lot people on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, are worried that their vote's going to count or even get there. And then today, the Harris County GOP issued a statement saying that they are suing Harris County to end mail-in ballots. So, this is happening all over, and it's very disconcerting. I plan on voting for a mail-in ballot. I've requested that. And I think a lot of people are concerned because you don't want to be in a situation where there's long lines.
Yeah.
And some people are not going to wear face masks. Some people, unfortunately, politically think it's their right to infect you. And add to that right now that there's, the national advisor to the president for the pandemic is arguing for herd immunity, which is essentially get everybody together and let them get sick.
Yeah.
And then we'll all get better.
So let me play devil's advocate here. First off, I've got to say, you're talking about the history. And we like to think that there was a time that politics was nicer, right? That we were, you're talking about unity. But if we look at the history of political fighting, back to 1780, at least 1800, it's been very, very divisive, right? And some of the same rhetoric has been used continuously, right? Basically, this is a slippery slope, and if you vote for this candidate, we're gonna, go off the deep end, and calamity will follow. And my party is a safe party. So we've seen that on all sides, right? On every side. That's not unusual. And look, we just finished celebrating Women's Equality Day, where the 19th Amendment went into effect after it was ratified by the 36th state Tennessee. So League of Women Voters is celebrating the centennial anniversary of women nationwide getting the right to vote. And one of the arguments used historically against women voting was that politics was a man's thing, and it was too dirty for women to get involved. And so, there's always been some of this, alcohol and drinking and carousing and fist fights at political events. And so that has happened quite a bit throughout our history, but it does seem, and I know a lot of people, and I see this on social media from my friends, people will say, look, I don't want to talk about this. I'm going to, don't expect to see me on social media for the next 3 months because I'm taking a hiatus. People don't want to talk about politics. Even in the parties, they're not unified. In the Democratic Party, we see a lot of younger progressives and even older progressives who were upset over the candidates. In the Republican Party, we see the Lincoln Project, right? And Kellyanne Conway's husband, George, was one of the leaders of this. That are basically Republicans against the president, against their own candidate. So it does seem, so on the one hand, I said this is historically, it has always been conflict involved in politics. But on the other hand, it seems like there is more. Do you think that's upsetting people? And, we're seeing a lot of the violence that we're talking about, the social unrest, whether in Kenosha or in other places. Do you think that there is more this time?
I'll let Ashley go first.
Okay.
I think so. My earliest memories of political socialization are when Bill Clinton became president the first time. And I remember just sort of from my child's impression of things that people did seem very polarized. Just the adults that I was around seemed to have really strong opinions about either for Clinton or against Clinton, and really strong opinions throughout, his whole administration, which was eventful in a number of ways. And I think that sort of set me to expect that, politics was an eventful sort of partisan experience. Definitely, I saw that in the Bush administration. One of the factors that I think is making this much more explosive is that a lot of political norms are gone. So, for example, this is much earlier, but when you had Mitch McConnell sort of change the norms about how we deal with Supreme Court nominations, in a way, if you look at how much even more pressure we're putting on Supreme Court nominations and the president's link to that, then you see how kind of having this norm disappear or be violated is changing our expectation level, or maybe changing the temperature of the water that we're in. And for example, to give another instance, when the president is tweeting things that are really not the norm, when he's talking about private citizens that he's calling out either as heroes or as villains, when he's saying lock someone up, or he's calling somebody thug or a group of people thugs, when he's having events at the White House for his campaign, when he's running the Republican convention at the White House, these are all norms that are being broken. And I think that whether or not we all consciously realize that the norms are going one by one, I think we're being affected by it. And so then this makes us concerned about the future. Sort of like, if these norms are fading away, then what can we expect for the future? What we normally think about our future in terms of outcomes, but outcomes guided by norms that we've already experienced. What? One thing I see a lot of people worry about is whether the president will accept a vote against him, or if he will even total the ballots in time, things like this. So I
have concern about that. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. It's a serious concern, and this is another level of uncertainty that I think makes citizens really afraid. We depend on institutional norms in a lot of ways for our political activity and for our planning for the future. Even being able to say, well, if Trump does get elected again, and if I'm against Trump, this is what I'll do in the next 4 years, or whatever. These are the positions I plan to take. You don't even know if your vote is going to be counted. So you're sort of uncertain of what is in your power and what is not.
I was talking to some friends of mine that are African American. One of the things that one of them raised, she said that her mother faced that when she first registered to vote, she faced had to go there and vote despite people with shotguns They were standing outside. And she says, now she sees people with, AK-47s and MAC-9s and other kinds of weapons that are, walking through the streets, carrying the American flag and Trump signs. This is very disconcerting. It is an atmosphere that one way or another can suppress people from voting. And I tie that in because she was saying, hey, I'm not going to go to the polls. I don't want to risk that. I want to vote by mail. And now there's the concern, will you be able to vote by mail? And if you do vote by mail, will it be counted? And if it is counted, won't the president anyway say, oh, it's all fraudulent, it's been tampered, et cetera, et cetera. It's almost as if he's creating a scenario in people's minds to nullify the elections. And that's a terrible situation. I think as Americans, we have to say this election belongs to us, this process belongs to us, that we are going to vote. We're going to ask other people to vote, whoever they vote for. But we have to commit that the outcome of this election, whoever ultimately wins, we're going to support. Unfortunately, we're not confident that the person who's currently in the White House is going to abide by those results, and that's a terrible scenario. Gene, you're muted.
I'm sorry. The dogs were barking in the background. This is one of the talking about norms. Normally we would be sitting in a studio recording this, right? That has some soundproofing and whatnot. And I'm sitting at home in my office, and the dogs are barking in the background. So everything we are living in a very unconventional world right now, right? We're isolated because of the virus. People are restless, and so when maybe that's why protests seem more and more ominous right now, is because people have time on their hands and they're looking for an outlet. I don't know. Are we feeding this fear that's going on around, or I'll give you. So I read something the other day that was put out by an office talking about a group called QAnon, and I'm not that familiar with it, but it's a conservative, and I have conservative friends who I see on Facebook telling other people, do not follow these people. They're conspiracy theorists. They're leading us down the wrong path. Don't get involved with them. So this is even coming from my conservative friends. And then I see groups, you hear of groups like, I think the Boogaloo Boys, which is supposedly, they're tied in with some of the violence going on in some of the demonstrations where there's peaceful protests and then you have infiltrators coming in. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, and I try to stay away from that because, it's very easy to get involved in these conspiracy theory things. But are we so tense right now because of all the changes that are going on in the world that we're more likely to fall for this, both in the right and on the left?
If I can just start with that, we have a situation, unfortunately, where trust in America has declined. And look at the growth of the anti-vaccine movement. Today, if a vaccine was created for COVID, first it's going to take a while because there's 4 different strains. But let's say it was, and the FDA said, this is good, let's go for it, or we'll give a tentative okay. 40% of Americans, irrespective whether they're a Democrat or Republican, say they won't get the vaccine because they don't trust the government and they don't trust vaccines. That's scary.
Yeah.
So you've got that sort of questioning of the government and distrust. Then you've got this anti-scientific group that they don't want to know the science. They just want to know what, whatever their whoever it is that they turn to, a priest, a minister, a political leader, etc., that they have faith in, a union leader, tell me what to do and I'll do it. unfortunately. There's a certain group of followers like that. So we in the United States are more prone than some other countries, and I'm not saying all other countries, but we're more prone to conspiracy theories. Unfortunately, right now, you're actually having the growth of those organizations. They've become organizations. There are now 12 candidates that are running for Congress, and that as nominees that are proponents of QAnon. So that's never been the case before. This is a very challenging time, and it's a very concerning time. But I do have faith. I think you find there's more unity in America than there's division. And I work with the Kettering Foundation and others, and we've really been trying to find the common ground that unites us, and to bring Democrats, Republicans, but people that support Trump and people that hate Trump, together at the table to find common ground, because ultimately America has to be united. And we cannot be misled by demagogues or totalitarians or threats on the left or threats on the right. And I think as academics, we also we're facing students every day. We've got to encourage them. They're the future of Texas. They're the future of America. We've got to encourage them, give them the tools so they can distinguish between fact and fiction or propaganda, and then encourage them to have faith in America, faith in the system, and vote, and continue to vote, because they are the future of this country, the future of democracy.
Can I jump in here and share something with you that I'd like to talk about? We're talking about the public and what people believe. So we've recently seen a couple, we see polls all the time. So let me look at and share with you here. These are some poll studies, and this is it's Procon. I'm not sure what that is. I guess I should know that, right? It's just a site that I was looking at where somebody who has assembled several polls, and so it's looking at several polls recently, and so this is what people by political affiliation feel. And so I wanted to go through this. So Democrats are concerned about healthcare, climate change. That's an issue I haven't heard about in a while. The economy and Trump's record. Republicans, economy and jobs, immigration and healthcare. Independents, healthcare, economy, and climate change. And that's kind of an interesting thing, because I haven't really heard much about climate change in a while. And some of these other issues, like on this one, that are further down the list, abortion, foreign policy, the Supreme Court, opioid epidemic. Now that was a big thing. Actually, Trump was going to lead the way on that, and at the very beginning of his term, right? That was the big issue. Let's look at the Harvard study: healthcare, environment, climate change, and guns. For the Democrats, Republicans, immigration again, terrorism, healthcare, national security, healthcare, and much the same for independents as in the other poll. And the Gallup poll, you see the same topics: healthcare, gun policy, climate change. To be honest, gun policy is something, I guess you do hear about that. That's tied up in the civil unrest issue, maybe, but it doesn't seem like that's been kind of a separate issue that's been spoken of, except when something cataclysmic happens. But again, Republicans, terrorism, national security. So it's these same issues over and over again by either side, right? And they're not that far off. And so, Bill, your statement is that as Americans, we really agree on a lot of things, depending on where we are. Maybe not we may not be at the same solutions, but we do have a lot of the same concerns. And so I want to talk to you about some of these issues. And are you seeing people talk about, obviously healthcare, that's tied up with COVID, right? Guns and terrorism, that's tied up with national security, and as Ashleen was saying earlier, law and order. Are we really talking about the same topics just from different perspectives? Ashleen, let's start with you.
I think that that would be the most optimistic reading. Sort of, I tend to think about it this way. If you just abstract out and you think about what voters, like without partisanship, what they're likely to care about, they are likely to care about things that they consider essential to their lives and essential to their political community, and they want stability. And I think that's the core where Americans agree. Okay, we want stability. We want our communities to flourish. I think all partisans and all citizens would like there to be more social trust than there is. But then how this filters out into actual policy gets more particular. So whereas you might have someone who's thinking about stability and the future and the common good, who's going to prioritize the environment as a part of that on the left, then on the right, you would see, you see all the time people who prioritize immigration as sort of the path to this, saying, well, we need to stop the influx, or we need to stop people from taking our jobs or whatever. And you actually, those two issues actually have this connection, which I think has to do really closely with how we think about production in the United States and what production and economic activity means for the people in the community and for the environment itself. So in that way, we're united. But then if you bring two people together, that's probably the best place for them to start, not to actually start all the way out here on immigration or start all the way out here on the environment, but to maybe begin with some sort of reflection on the connection between the environment and the economy and the citizen. I do see a lot more political pessimism in my younger students than I've seen when I started teaching. They're much more likely to see someone who disagrees with them as some kind of enemy. I think actually movements like QAnon have increased this sort of tendency. I do have a lot of young people who read sources that are being filtered through QAnon influenced reporting or personalities. And this actually makes me afraid that while we do have sort of this shared maybe concern in a big level, that our glasses or our perceptive abilities are narrowing our overlap with each other even more. I've actually seen people attribute things to, you know, an international pedophilia ring, or the Jews, or the that normally you would just say, this is a political gridlock, or this is an example of citizen disagreement. That is one of the things that I think scares me the most, because we have that shared, maybe that sort of shared hope for the common good, but we're becoming less and less able to talk to each other about it, and to offer reasons for it in a way that makes sense to other interlocutors.
That's interesting. Bill, what do you think?
Well, you know, there's been some polls released recently, and you showed the polls on our attitudes about, you know, what are the top 3 or 4 items of concern, and you know, where the rank may be different. You know, let's take healthcare. People are very concerned that they're not going to have healthcare insurance, that they're not going to have any coverage. If you look at one of the main reasons people lost homes through foreclosures in the last recession, and more recently that are losing them now, it's because of healthcare costs. And suddenly, when they lost their job, they've lost benefits, and they have to choose between, do you pay a mortgage, do you pay rent, or do you pay for healthcare? And if they've got chronic conditions, you know, sometimes it's between choosing for medication that will keep them alive or paying rent to have a roof over their head. Terrible situation. I think that we really have to find the common ground. That's one thing. You know, interestingly enough, there was this CBS poll last week that said that on the condition of the national economy, they found of national registered voters most likely to vote that 67% of Republicans said, hey, the economy is great. 75% said that my family and the conditions in life are better today than they were 4 years ago, of Republicans. On the other hand, if you ask that same question to Americans as a whole, and that includes Republicans, 61% said the economy is worse, and 63% said it's got that we're in a worse conditions in general in the United States than we were 4 years ago. So there is agreement on that. Unfortunately, it's very polarized. And again, I do think that the task of a new administration, if we have one, and I hope we do, will be to try and find that common ground and to get us back to having dialogue, to hopefully expose some of these conspiracy theorists as what they are, as fringe movements that unfortunately are undermining our healthcare, our security, our peace of mind. And you know, I think the other thing too is that we have got to get, you know, we've got to get some legislation around immigration. We've got to get legislation around healthcare. We've got to get a safety net again, so that when people lose their jobs, that they have something to fall back on. None of those things are taking place under Trump. The Republicans have talked about that they were going to pass an amazing healthcare program. They have not. They could not, even when they controlled both the House and the Senate. The only thing they could agree on is we're going to end Obamacare. And they're still pushing that.
And they still haven't.
And they still haven't. So, you know, 4 years later, they're still calling it, oh, Obama has brought socialism into our country, and Biden's going to continue that. It's crazy. You know, you drive down the 59, and I was driving down yesterday, and there's a huge poster that says, fight socialism, vote for Trump. What? What socialists are running?
Yeah, that we've been playing. I was looking at this, showing some of my students this political cartoon from the 1870s, and there was a charge that people were being socialists, that anarchists were socialists. So we've been using that old chestnut for quite some time. I do want to ask though, talking about the economy, and that's been one of President Trump's big issues. Is that, you know, there was a good economy up until January. And is it not maybe unfair to him? And I think maybe all presidents do this a little bit, but we tend to blame the person in office for how the economy is, even though there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Our economy, whether we want to admit it or not, is global. And so, you know, a downturn in the Japanese stock market can affect us. A downturn in other places can affect us. A business going, I mean, it's a much more tangled web than I think we realize at first. But so Trump did not plan. The Republicans did not plan COVID. They could not. No one could have foreseen it. And so it happens. The economy, as a result, our economy, and globally, the economy has suffered because of it, because so much of our business around the world is service-oriented. Is it fair? Is this not maybe going back to those old medieval myths of, like, if the king is healthy, the nation will be fine, and if the king is corrupt? So are we not maybe even in our politics today buying into some of those antiquated myths about politics? So go back to the question, is it fair to blame Trump for the economy or for the response to COVID? Because this is something that nobody was prepared for. Are we being unfair?
Can I
So,
start?
yeah, you can start.
Just very briefly, and I'll pass to you, Ashley. You know, the thing is that we were prepared. There actually was a national plan that was created by an independent task force established by under Obama that did promote, that laid out exactly what we should do if a pandemic hit. Trump threw that away. He said, we're not going to follow that. So yes, we can blame him. But the other is, you know, whenever there is, if whether it's a governor, a president, a county commissioner, whatever, if there is a disaster, you judge them on how they responded. You know, if there's a hurricane, remember what happened in Puerto Rico. Remember how long it took to get aid there and get it distributed and get electricity back on, get water to them. Remember, we basically here in Houston, it was organized locally before there was ever any presence of FEMA. The reality of it is that you judge your elected officials based on how they do in crisis, and that is fair. He may have had a wonderful economy when and it was already improving under Obama. It was improving. Certainly, Trump will never give Obama any credit for that. But I think you've got to. The reality, yeah, the economy on Wall Street went up, but only 40% of Americans have Wall Street stock. A lot of us have retirement that invests in 401ks and everything. Reality of it is a lot of us have lost money in the 401ks. You know, and a lot of people have had to take those 401ks out in order to not lose their houses.
Yeah.
Those people are angry and they're going to vote. And they're probably going to vote not just against Trump, they're going to vote against his party as well. And, you know, we'll see what the outcome is. But yeah, I do think it is fair. And it's what people do, unfortunately.
Ashleen?
So I think on the one hand, there is sort of this, you know, conventional attribution of success to the president, of failure to the president, based on things that may not totally be under their control. You know, it would be hard for Trump to, he wants to take credit for the economy. Some people say that it was actually Obama. It's always the previous administration that sets up the first term president. And then now you have this case where the economy is not doing as well. And then people will want to say, well, you know, either he will say, I blame this on Obama, or you have people who will say, no, I blame it on Trump. And so there is a lot of ambiguity there, and I can see why, you know, it can look a little bit like that medieval kind of the health of the king is the flourishing of the kingdom. But I totally agree with Dr. Flores that when you have something like an emergency situation, whether we're going to talk about something like COVID, whether we're going to talk about something like racial unrest, or if we're going to talk about a dire economy, the reason that you have an executive is so that they can take executive action, especially in a time of crisis. That's one of the primary reasons that the executive in the United States is unitary. It's supposed to be more effective and better able to act quickly in the face of great danger. And so I think what we've seen happen with Trump is a great inability to act quickly. And even to act on early information. We've seen now that he had certain information about COVID very, very early, before it became something that the public was really aware of as being an existential threat to us. And some people say, well, he sees potential threats all the time, but certainly by the time things were as dire as they were in China, it was something he should have started to take more seriously. And getting rid of the plans that already existed about the pandemic is an example, again, of poor leadership. You can't respond quickly to an emergency situation when you have the poor judgment to get rid of the directions for emergency situations. which is a part of your job. I remember when Trump was elected, I had some friends who were really excited about his election. And one of the things that I kept thinking was, you know, if things go well, relatively speaking, for the next 4 years, we have a pretty sort of stable historical moment, then maybe Trump will do okay, even if I'm not so positive about him. But if there's a crisis, if something really dangerous happens, he will not have the capacity to be a leader during that time. And I really hoped there wouldn't be a crisis, because I worried that he would get, you know, that he'd be able to get us out of it. And I think that, you know, he hasn't. Now, one of the things, though, that's been interesting is, that's just from my opinion as sort of a political scientist and political theorist. But one thing that adds another layer to this is that so much of what is happening right now is about interpretation. So I might point to something that the president failed to do on COVID, or I might point to something where he's focusing more on, you know, trying to stoke division or unrest. And I'll talk to another citizen about that, and to them, he did the right thing on COVID. Or to them, he's not causing division, he's backing the blue, you know. And so it's like multiple different languages. And that's one of the things that I think is complicating the normal interpretation of the executive. Because normally we're sort of like, the buck stops here, whether it should or not, whether it's you or not, you're the one who this is happening under, and you're going to get a mandate or you're going to get removed when we're looking at the second term. But with him, I have no idea, you know, what people are going to end up saying about him, because things that I think are clearly troublesome, some other people actually will say that's a virtue or that's positive. And then I know to them I must sound crazy too, right? To them I must sound like I'm describing an alternate reality. And I have no idea what that's going to look like in a presidential election, because once, let's say that we do get to vote and that we do get the ballots counted, and let's even say that we don't have Trump as a president, what are the people who believe these things about him going to do about the election results? What if they think it's a conspiracy of QAnon, or the Hollywood pedophiles that they think are driving all of this that Trump is going to save us from? Are they going to accept the election results? Or what if they think that this means that the Democrats are going to run everything and their property is going to be lost in looting? You know, I'm not saying that's the right way to think of it, but that's how a lot of people think of it. Mm-hmm. Are they going to accept election results? Again, I feel like we're in this moment where if there were more civic trust and there was a shared civic language, it would be easier to get into the next 4 years no matter what happened. But with those things gone, there's a lot of trepidation. I do blame the president for that.
Bill, last word here. We're running out of time. Quickly, what do you hear from your students in class? So you're seeing college students. It's the first week. Right now, all of mine are asking me, why isn't this working? Why isn't this turned on our learning management system?
I'm
are you hearing
those
anything?
emails too.
What are you hearing from the students about politics?
You know, a lot of them are very concerned about our country, and a lot of them wish they could vote. Many of our students are undocumented or from other countries, but those that can vote really want to. They're seeing, well, a lot of them are first-time voters, and they're excited by that. And I see hope here, because if you look at the issues that are on their minds, it is about the economy, it is about climate change, and it is about healthcare, and it's about jobs. Are they going to have jobs when they graduate? Will some of the industries after COVID? Will there be industries that will hire people after COVID? Will there be public schools that hire people? Those are real concerns that this generation has. And I think we owe it to them to make certain that the answer is yes, that they have a future, that we're going to help them get a foothold in that future and prepare them for the skills they need.
Ashleen, real quick, what about your students?
Oh, they're a mix. So all my students are wonderful, and they all have a great sense of hope in the sense that they want a sort of change that will bring them more flourishing, more stability. They compare, their position to the position of their parents at their age, and they say, my prospects are not good. A lot of it has to do, though, with who they identify with as saving them. That's been the thing I keep noticing, is if they think that their sort of salvation comes from a certain kind of right politics, they go in for it, even if you wouldn't think that they would be the kind of person who did. And if you have the same sort of uncertainty and they see far left politics as a panacea for this versus what they call the institutionalized left or the institutional left, they'll go in for that too. They want to know that they're going to be okay. And one of the hardest things, I think, being a teacher right now is that I want to tell them that they're going to be okay. But I don't know what political alternatives to point them to that they will actually feel that they can trust.
Ashleen Menchaca Buniello and Dr. William Flores, thank you very much for talking with me this evening. Thank you for joining us out there for Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Gene Preuss for the League of Women Voters of Houston. Have a good night.